I took the night overtime because the invoices were stacking up. Swedish Medical Center bills every 2 weeks for my mom's memory care. Lisa Ortega, room 214, extended stay residential unit. The January statement came to $3,900, and I'd already pushed February back twice. They were polite about it. That made it worse, probably. I had rent on top of that. My place in Ballard ran $1,400 a month for a studio with a kitchenette and a shower that only worked hot if you didn't mind waiting. Groceries, the diesel bill on my van, the usual stuff that doesn't wait just because you're underwater. So when Abby Ramirez called me on a Thursday afternoon and asked if I wanted dock shifts at Port Townsend, I said yes before she finished the question. Nights, she said, starting Monday. Refrigeration maintenance on the supply barges, standard units, nothing exotic. You've got the certs, right? Yeah, good. Bring your tools. We pay same day if you log clean. That was it. She didn't ask if I had other work lined up or if the drive was too far. Abby didn't do small talk. I appreciated that. Port Townsend is about 2 hours north of Seattle if you skip the ferry and take the long way around through Tacoma. I drove up Sunday night and slept in the van behind a Safeway, so I'd be on site by 5 a.m. Monday. The parking lot was empty except for a couple of semis and one RV with Washington plates and a bumper sticker that said I'd rather be fishing. I didn't sleep much. I never do before a new job. I kept going over my tool inventory in my head. Manifold gauge, leak detector, refrigerant recovery kit, the digital thermometer I bought used off a guy in Everett. All of it decent enough. Nothing fancy, but I wasn't doing anything fancy. When my phone alarm went off at 4:30, I brushed my teeth with a bottle of water and changed into my work jacket. The rain had started sometime during the night. Light, constant, the kind that soaks through everything if you stand in it long enough. The docks were a 15-minute walk from the Safeway. I got there early and waited by the gate until a guy in a high-vis vest unlocked it and waved me through without saying anything. Washington State Ferries ran a contract operation out of the industrial dock on the south side. It wasn't the main passenger terminal, just freight and cargo, a few big warehouses, and a repair shed that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 90s. There were 3 barges tied up that morning, all of them broad and flat with shipping containers stacked too high. The kind of setup that moves equipment and supplies to the islands or over to the naval base on Indian Island. I found the office trailer near the loading zone. Abby was inside with a clipboard and a thermos of coffee that smelled better than it probably tasted. "Ortega," she said when I knocked. "Morning." She looked me over once, then nodded. "You'll be working solo most nights. Refrigeration skids are prepped dockside before loading. Your job is to check seals, log pressures and temps, make sure nothing's leaking or shorting. If a unit goes down, you call it in before you touch it. Got it?" "Got it." Work orders come daily. I'll leave them in the tool cage. You sign off when you're done and drop the sheet in the lockbox by 6 a.m. Questions? I didn't have any. She handed me a laminated ID badge on a lanyard. My name was printed under the Washington State Ferries logo, along with a photo I didn't remember taking. Probably pulled from my contractor file. "Wear that, the whole shift," she said. "Don't lose it." "Okay." "Good. Cage is around back. Code's 3372. Lock it when you're done." That was it. She went back to her clipboard, and I walked out into the rain. The tool cage was a chain link enclosure behind the repair shed, maybe 10 feet by 10, with a padlock and a roll-down door that rattled when I lifted it. Inside were a couple of workbenches, a pegboard with spare parts, and a plastic bin labeled "Work Orders, Current." I grabbed the top sheet. It was simple, standard stuff. A carrier refrigeration skid on barge 4, unit number stamped on the corner. Instructions to verify operational status and log readings every 2 hours. No special notes. I got to work. The skid was a basic commercial unit, the kind you see on the back of delivery trucks or in freight depots. A compressor, a condenser coil, an evaporator fan, all mounted on a steel frame with wheels so you could move it with a pallet jack. This one was running when I got to it. humming steady. No weird rattles or hisses. I checked the seals first. Clean. No cracks. No frost buildup. The refrigerant lines were solid, and the condenser coil didn't have any obvious damage. I clipped my gauge to the service port and watched the needle settle. Pressure looked good. Temperature read 38 degrees inside the container. It was cooling. Right where it should be. I logged everything on the work order, signed it, and moved to the next one. That was the routine. 2 weeks of it, 5 nights a week, 10-hour shifts. Abby left the orders in the cage every evening before I clocked in. I'd grab them, check the skids, log the data, and drop the sheets in the lockbox before dawn. Then I'd drive back to Seattle, sleep 4 or 5 hours, and do it again. The work was easy. Repetitive, mostly. I didn't mind that. I liked jobs where I knew what I was doing and didn't have to talk to anyone. Abby barely checked in. I saw her maybe twice in those 2 weeks, and both times she just asked if I had any issues. I didn't, so she left me alone. I figured that's why she gave me the work. I was quiet. I showed up on time. I didn't ask questions about where the freight was going or what was in the containers. That wasn't my job, and I didn't care. The paycheck cleared same day like she'd promised, $1,200 for the first week. I sent most of it to Swedish Medical and kept enough for gas and food. It wasn't enough to catch up, but it kept me from falling further behind. That counted for something. The skids were all the same during those first 2 weeks. Carrier units, standard configuration, regular freight. I got used to the sound of them, the low hum of the compressor, the click of the thermostat cycling on and off. I could tell when a unit was running clean just by standing next to it for a few seconds. I went home soaked most mornings. The rain didn't stop, and the wind off the water cut through my jacket no matter how many layers I wore underneath. I'd peel everything off in my apartment, hang it over the shower rod, and crash on my bed still smelling like diesel and seawater. I didn't learn where anything was going. That wasn't part of the job. The barges came in, I checked the skids. The barges left. Sometimes they'd be gone by the time I finished my shift. Sometimes they'd still be there the next night with new containers stacked on top. I didn't track it. Then the pattern broke. It was a Wednesday, middle of my 3rd week. I showed up at the tool cage, same as always, punched in the code, and pulled the door up. Someone was standing inside. I stopped, didn't say anything. Just stood there with my hand still on the door. The guy was maybe 5'9", wiry, wearing a naval-based security uniform with a radio clipped to his belt. Short black hair, narrow face, dark eyes that didn't quite meet mine. His hands were shaking a little. Not a lot, but enough that I noticed. "Ortega?" he said. "Yeah. Scott Weber, base security." He didn't offer his hand. Just held up a laminated ID badge, flashed it, and tucked it back into his jacket. "I need to see your work order before you start tonight." I looked past him. The bin was still there on the bench, same as always. "It's in the bin," I said. "I know. I'll hand it to you." He reached into the bin and pulled out a single sheet of paper, not the usual print. This one had no logo at the top, no Washington State Ferries header, just a tracking number in the corner, something like NB047J, and a line of text underneath. "Maintain refrigeration unit. Do not power down. Log temps every 2 hours." That was it. No barge number, no container ID, no supervisor signature. Scott held it out, and I took it. "This stays with you the whole shift," he said. "When you're done, you give it back to me. Don't leave it in the lockbox. Don't make copies. Understood?" "Okay." His jaw tightened. He looked like he wanted to say something else, but didn't. Just nodded once and stepped past me out of the cage. I watched him walk back toward the main dock, his boots scraping on the wet pavement. He kept his head down, shoulders tight, like he was cold or didn't want to be seen. I looked at the work order again. No logo. Just tracking numbers. and an instruction to keep the unit running non-stop. Weird, but not impossible. I folded the paper and slipped it into my jacket pocket. Then I grabbed my tools and got to work. Scott showed up again on Tuesday. Rainy, the kind that doesn't quit, just keeps coming down in sheets across the parking lot and the dock. I'd been running the same routine for 4 nights since he handed me that first weird work order, checking the regular skids, logging tomp, dropping the sheets in the lockbox before dawn. Normal work. Nothing strange. Then Scott walked into the tool cage while I was pulling my manifold gauge off the pegboard. Same uniform, same radio clipped to his belt, same shaking hands. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there near the plastic bin, rain dripping off his jacket onto the concrete floor. I waited. Figured he'd give me another odd work order or tell me to skip a barge. Instead, he pulled a laminated card from his breast pocket and held it out. "Tonight's different," he said. His voice was tight. "Barge leaves at 9:10. Sharp. No matter what." I took the card. It was about the size of a credit card, maybe a little bigger, with 5 lines of text printed in bold black font. No logo, no header, just rules. 1. No phone on deck. Leave it in the cage or your vehicle. 2. Do not approach container vents. 3. Wear earplugs. Entire shift. 4. If deck lights fail, stand still until power restores. 5. Disembark at Bangor Dock immediately. Do not sign any paperwork. I read it twice. Then I looked up at Scott. "This some kind of safety gag?" I said. He didn't smile. Didn't blink. Just stared at me with those dark eyes that kept darting toward the tool cage door, toward the pier gate beyond it. "No," he said. I turned the card over. Nothing on the back, just smooth laminated plastic. "What's on the barge?" I asked. "Refrigeration unit," Scott said. "Same as always. You check it, log temps every 2 hours, make sure it stays cold." "Then why the rules?" His jaw tightened. He looked at his hands, saw them shaking, and shoved them into his jacket pockets. "Just follow them," he said. 9:10 departure. Point Hudson Dock. You'll see the container." That's when I noticed the blue wax smear near his left cuff. Same kind of wax they use on cargo seals. Fresh, still tacky. "Scott," I said, "what's in the container?" He stepped back. His radio crackled, some voice asking about a gate code, and he turned the volume down without answering it. 9:10, he said again. "Don't be late." Then he left. Just walked out into the rain, shoulders hunched, moving fast toward the main dock like something was chasing him. I stood there holding the laminated card. "Read the rules a 3rd time. Earplugs, entire shift. Do not approach container vents. If deck lights fail, stand still." I thought about the $1,400 rent due in 6 days. Thought about Swedish Medical's billing cycle. Thought about the fact that I'd been doing this work for 3 weeks without incident, and Scott Weber was probably just some paranoid security guy who took his job too seriously. I pocketed the card, grabbed my tools, locked the cage behind me. But I didn't laugh it off, not really, because his hands had been shaking that hard. The barge was tied up at Point Hudson Dock, same as the others I'd worked. 30 feet long, flat deck, railings on 3 sides. 1 shipping container chained down in the center, dark green with no company markings. Just a white tag bolted near the door, Unit K-17. A carrier refrigeration skid sat beside it. Standard model, same kind I'd logged a dozen times. Compressor, condenser coils, control panel, bolted to the deck with heavy-duty brackets. Scott was already there. Standing near the gangway, arms crossed, watching me approach. I checked my watch. 9:05. "Good," Scott said. He gestured toward the container. "That's yours. Log every 2 hours. Stay on deck until we dock at Bangor." I walked over to the skid, clipped my gauge to the service port. The compressor was running loud, louder than usual. Not failing loud, just working harder than it should have been for a unit this size. I checked the discharge line, frosted over. thick white frost coating the copper from the compressor outlet all the way to the condenser. That wasn't normal. Frost on the suction line, sure, that's expected. But discharge side frost means the system's running cold and hard, way past standard refrigeration temps. Either the thermostat was set wrong or someone wanted whatever was inside that container frozen solid. I glanced at Scott. He was staring at the container vents. 2 small grills, one on each door, about head height. Standard ventilation for refrigerated cargo. He wasn't blinking. "Scott," I said, "this unit's running past spec. You want me to adjust the—" "No," he said, fast, sharp. "Don't touch the settings. Just log the temps." I looked at the control panel. Digital readout said -18 degrees Celsius. That's 0 Fahrenheit. Colder than most freight needed. "What's inside?" I asked. Scott's hand went to his radio. He didn't key it, just rested his palm on it, fingers tight. "Doesn't matter," he said. "You're here for the skid. That's it." I wanted to push. Wanted to ask why his hands were still shaking, why he kept staring at those vents, why the rules card was sitting in my jacket pocket like some kind of warning I didn't understand yet. But the barge engine coughed to life. 908. The deckhand, kid I didn't recognize, maybe 20, wearing a yellow slicker, started unhooking the mooring lines. Scott stepped closer to me, close enough that I could see the rain on his face, the tight set of his jaw. "Follow the rules," he said quietly. "All of them." Then he moved to the railing and stayed there, eyes locked on the container. The barge pulled away from the dock at exactly 9:10. The first hour was fine, boring even. I sat on an equipment crate near the skid, earplugs in, logging temps every 20 minutes just to have something to do. The compressor kept that same loud hum, steady and aggressive. Discharge line stayed frosted. Container sat there, chained and silent. Scott didn't move, didn't sit, just stood at the railing, hands in his pockets, staring at the vents. I thought about asking him if he wanted coffee from the wheelhouse, thought about saying something to break the tension, but the earplugs muffled everything, and honestly, I didn't want to know what he was listening for. Around 10:15, I logged another temp. Still -18, still running hard. I pulled one earplug out to check the compressor sound. Same steady hum. No grinding, no stuttering. Healthy, just cold. That's when the deck lights cut out, all of them. Overhead floods, railing strips, wheelhouse glow. Everything went black in one hard snap. The intercom crackled. Someone in the wheelhouse swearing, another voice yelling about breakers. I stood up, instinct. My hand went to my flashlight. Then I remembered the card. 4. If deck lights fail, stand still until power restores. I froze. Scott was already looking at me. I could barely see him in the dark, just his silhouette against the faint glow of the shoreline a quarter-mile off. He raised one hand, palm out. The signal was clear. Don't move. I stayed still, tools at my feet, earplugs in one hand, heart starting to kick a little faster because this wasn't normal, and Scott's hand wasn't shaking anymore. It was locked rigid, holding that signal like his life depended on it. The compressor kept humming, loud in the dark. And somewhere faint under that hum, I thought I heard something else. Something from inside the container. Movement. Maybe. Or metal shifting. Or nothing at all. I didn't move. Scott didn't move. The wheelhouse crew kept fumbling with the breakers, voices tight and frustrated over the intercom. And the deck stayed dark. I stayed put. That was the rule. Rule 4. If deck lights fail, stand still until power restores. I didn't have the card out, but I'd read it enough times that the words were stuck in my head pretty solid. The darkness was complete. Not the kind where your eyes adjust after a minute and you start making out shapes. This was the kind where the only reference points were sounds and the faint glow from shore about a quarter-mile off, barely enough to show the railing edge. The compressor kept humming, loud and steady. Same aggressive pitch it had been running all night. I figured I should count. Give myself something to track instead of just standing there like an idiot with my hands frozen and my pulse doing double time in my throat. 1, 2, 3. I kept my breathing shallow. The earplugs were still in my left hand, the one I'd pulled out to check the compressor sound before everything went dark. My right hand was empty. Tools were somewhere near my feet. I didn't move to find them. Scott was out there somewhere. I couldn't see him, but I knew he was still holding that signal, palm out, telling me to stay frozen. His hand had been steady when the lights cut, not shaking. That bugged me more than the shaking had. 15, 16, 17. The wheelhouse crew was still working the problem. I could hear them over the intercom, voices tight and pissed off, talking about breakers and backup circuits. Someone said something about the generator, but the words got swallowed by static. 23, 24. Then I heard it. Footsteps, not boots, not the heavy thud of work shoes on steel deck. These were bare feet, soft, deliberate, moving across the deck from somewhere near the railing toward the container. I stopped counting. The steps weren't hurried. They moved at an even pace, careful like someone who knew exactly where they were going in the dark. No stumbling, no hesitation. They stopped, right at the container, maybe 3 feet from where I was standing, just on the other side of the skid. I didn't move. Didn't turn my head. My hand was still holding the earplug and my fingers were cramping from how tight I was gripping it, but I didn't let go. The compressor kept running, same hum, same pitch. Then I heard the scraping. Something moving along the vent slats. Slow, methodical. It started at the top corner of the left vent and dragged down, paused, moved across, dragged down again. The sound was too controlled to be an animal, too precise. It sounded like fingers, someone checking the edges of the slats, testing them. I started counting again because I didn't know what else to do. 31, 32. The scraping continued. It moved to the second vent now. Same pattern. Top corner, drag down, pause, move across. I could picture it in my head even though I couldn't see anything. Fingers running along each slat, checking the spacing, feeling the metal. My chest was tight. I wanted to look. Wanted to turn my head just enough to see who was standing there. But the rule said stand still, and Scott's hand had been locked rigid with that palm-out signal, and I figured breaking the rule right now was probably the worst idea I'd had in a long time. 48, 49, 50. The scraping stopped. The footsteps started again. Same soft, barefoot sound, moving away from the container, back toward the railing, even pace. No rush, then nothing, just the compressor and the wheelhouse crew swearing over the intercom and my own pulse hammering in my ears. 60. The light snapped back on. All of them at once. Overhead floods, railing strips, wheelhouse glow. The deck lit up bright and hard, and I blinked against it, my eyes watering from the sudden shift. Nobody was near the container. I looked, scanned the whole deck. Scott was still at the railing where he'd been before, hands in his pockets now, staring at the container. The deckhand in the yellow slicker was up near the wheelhouse, coiling a rope. Nobody else. No bare feet. No person who could have been standing at the vents 30 seconds ago. I exhaled, felt the air leave my lungs in a long, slow push. Then I looked at the vents. Frost was clinging to the rims. Thick white buildup around the edges of the slats, same kind of frost that had been coating the discharge line all night. But that didn't make sense. The vents were exhaust points. Warm air should have been pushing out through them, melting any frost that tried to form. I'd worked enough refrigeration systems to know how airflow worked. Exhaust vents didn't frost over, not unless the system was running backward or the airflow was blocked. I stepped closer. The frost was fresh, still white and crystalline. not the dull gray it turned when it started to melt and refreeze. And it was only around the rims. The slats themselves were clear. That bugged me. I was still staring at the frost when the skid alarm chirped. One short beep, high-pitched, the kind that meant the system was registering a fault. I turned to the control panel. The digital readout was climbing. -17, -16, -15. The temperature was rising even though the compressor was still running full throttle, same aggressive hum it had been maintaining all night. "Shit," I said. Quiet. Just under my breath. Scott's head turned toward me. He didn't move from the railing, but his eyes locked on. I crouched next to the skid and opened the service panel. My hands were steadier than I expected. Muscle memory, probably. I'd done this enough times that my brain just switched into diagnostic mode without asking permission. The compressor was fine. Running hard. No grinding, no stuttering. The condenser coils looked good. Frost still thick on the discharge line. But the temperature was still climbing. -14 now. I followed the coolant line with my eyes, tracing it from the compressor outlet through the condenser and back to the evaporator intake. There. The hose was pinched flat, right at the bend where it curved behind the mounting bracket. The rubber was compressed completely, no gap, cutting off flow. I leaned in closer, pulled my flashlight from my belt, and aimed it at the pinch point. No tool marks, no scratches on the hose, no dents in the bracket. The pinch looked deliberate, like someone had reached in and squeezed the hose with their bare hands until it collapsed. But that didn't make sense either. The hose was reinforced. It took serious pressure to flatten it. I'd need a clamp or a wrench to do it, and even then I'd probably leave marks. I sat back on my heels. The alarm chirped again. -12. I didn't have a choice. The temperature was climbing and the system was going to overheat if I didn't fix the flow. The rules didn't say anything about repairs, just log temps. But if the skid failed completely, Scott was going to have bigger problems than me breaking protocol. I pulled my tool bag closer and found the needle nose pliers. Then I repositioned myself, kneeling beside the skid, right next to the vents. The container was maybe 2 feet from my left shoulder. I could see the vent slats in my peripheral vision, but I kept my eyes down, focused on the hose, on the bracket, on the work. I slid the pliers into the gap behind the mounting bracket and carefully pried the hose free. It didn't want to move at first. The rubber had compressed so tight it had formed a seal against itself. I worked it slowly, wiggling the pliers, pulling the hose forward inch by inch until it popped free. The hose expanded. Not all the way. It had been pinched long enough that the rubber had started to take the shape. But it was open enough for flow now. I fed it back into the channel, keeping my hands steady, routing it away from the bracket edge so it wouldn't pinch again. The compressor hum stayed constant. My knees were pressing into the cold deck, and my fingers were starting to go numb, but I kept working. That's when I felt the breath. Warm air pushing out through the vent slats. Not hot, just warm. Body temperature, maybe. It brushed against my left shoulder and the side of my neck, steady and deliberate. I froze. The smell hit me next. Clean, sterile. It reminded me of the hallway outside Lisa's room at Swedish Medical, that specific combination of hospital laundry and industrial disinfectant they used on the floors. Sharp, but not chemical. Just clean. I tightened the first clamp, kept my eyes down, kept my hands moving. Then I heard the singing. Quiet. Barely louder than the compressor hum, but close, right on the other side of the steel. It wasn't words, just a melody, soft and even, like a lullaby or a hymn, the kind of thing you'd hum to yourself without thinking. The sound came through the vents, through the metal, vibrating in the deck under my knees. My body wanted to lean toward it. I felt the pull. physical. Like the sound had weight, and it was tugging at something in my chest, pulling me left, toward the vents, toward the container. I tightened the second clamp. My hands were shaking now, just a little, enough that the pliers slipped and I had to reset my grip. The singing continued, same melody, same soft, close tone. The warm breath kept pushing through the slats, brushing my shoulder, my neck, carrying that clean hospital smell. I finished tightening the clamp and sat back. I needed the singing to stop. Not completely, I knew that wasn't happening, but enough that I could think without feeling like my chest was being pulled apart. The earplugs were still in my left hand, one of them anyway. I'd pulled it out earlier to check the compressor sound, and then the lights went out, and I never got around to putting it back in. I shoved both plugs in deep, twisting them the way you're supposed to so they seal properly. The singing dropped to a muffled pulse, still there, still vibrating through the deck and into my ribs, but quieter, manageable. My throat kept tightening anyway, trying to match the tune even though I couldn't hear it clearly anymore. That part bothered me. I don't sing. Never have. But my body was trying to do it anyway, pulling the melody out of me without permission. I swallowed hard and focused on the skid, tools in my hands. Hose rerouted, clamps tight. The repair was done, but I hadn't restarted the unit yet. The compressor was still running, hadn't stopped, but the temperature was climbing because the coolant wasn't flowing right. -12 on the readout now, maybe -11. The alarm chirped again, short and high. I hit the restart sequence on the control panel. The compressor kicked into a higher load with a deeper hum that I felt more than heard through the earplugs. The discharge line started frosting over again, almost immediately, thick white spreading from the outlet toward the condenser. Good. That meant flow was back. I clipped my gauge to the service port and watched the needle settle. Pressure looked normal. Temperature started dropping. -12, -13, -14. I stood up and turned toward Scott. He was still at the railing, hands in his pockets, staring at the container. I walked over, took one earplug out so I could talk. Hose was sabotaged, I said. Scott didn't look at me. His eyes stayed locked on the vents. Pinched flat, I continued. No tool marks, no scratches. Someone crushed it by hand, which shouldn't be possible with reinforced rubber. Scott's jaw tightened. He finally glanced at me, then back at the container. Fixed? He asked. Yeah. Running cold again. He nodded once. His hand moved to his radio but didn't key it, just rested there. Then he turned toward me fully and pulled out the laminated card from his breast pocket. He tapped it twice with his index finger, pointing at Rule 5. Disembark at Bangor immediately. Do not sign paperwork. We have to reach the base before sunrise, Scott said quietly. His voice was tight, controlled. Daylight makes it stronger. I stared at him. Makes what stronger? He didn't answer, just looked at the container, then the wheelhouse, then back at me. Both, he said. Wheelhouse and container. Part of the same problem. That didn't make sense. The wheelhouse crew had been working the whole time, trying to fix the breakers when the lights went out. But Scott's hands weren't shaking anymore. They'd been steady since the darkness. And his eyes had that look people get when they're not telling you everything because they can't, not because they won't. How long until sunrise? I asked. Scott checked his watch. 3 hours. Maybe less. I put the earplug back in and walked back to the skid. Scott stayed at the railing. The barge cut across dark water. I could see the shoreline maybe half a mile out, scattered lights from houses or docks, but mostly just black. The compressor hummed at full load. I kept my phone in the van back at Point Hudson, locked in the glove box. Rule 1, no phone on deck. I'd followed that part without question because it was easy and concrete and didn't require me to think about singing or frost on vents or sabotaged hoses. I sat on the equipment crate again and logged the temperature. -17, holding steady. The skid was doing its job. I was doing mine. That was supposed to be enough. The deckhand in the yellow slicker walked past at some point, carrying a coil of rope toward the stern. Didn't look at me. Didn't look at Scott. Just kept moving. I checked my watch. 10:50. We'd been on the water for an hour and 40 minutes. The route to Bangor usually took 2.5 hours, maybe 3 depending on current. That left us another hour, give or take. I could handle an hour. The barge slowed. Not a lot. Just enough that the engine sound changed pitch and the wake flattened out behind us. I looked toward the wheelhouse but couldn't see anyone through the windows from this angle. Scott turned his head slightly, listening. His shoulders were tense again. The water looked wrong, flat, heavy. The ripples from the hull weren't spreading out the way they should. They were staying close, like the current had thickened into something that didn't want to move. I'd worked on fishing boats for a summer when I was 22, up near Anacortes, and I'd seen calm water before. Glassy water. This wasn't that. This was something else. I stood up and walked to the railing, looked over the side. The water was black, but not reflecting anything. No stars, no deck lights. Just black and smooth and wrong. Behind me, metal clinked. I turned around. The container was still chained to the deck. 4 heavy-duty chains, one at each corner, running from the container base to anchor points welded into the deck plating. The binders were still locked. I could see them from here. Thick steel mechanisms clamped tight. But the chains were loosening, link by link, slowly, not all at once. The chain at the front left corner shifted first, one link sliding free from the next with a soft metallic scrape. Then the front right, then the back left. The binders stayed locked. The chains just kept loosening anyway. Unit K-17 shifted. Just a little. A settling movement, like it was redistributing weight. The vibration came up through the deck and into my boots. Small, but definite. I didn't move. Couldn't. My hands were locked on the railing and my chest was tight and the earplugs weren't doing enough anymore. The singing was still there, muffled but present, and now the container was moving and the chains were coming loose without anyone touching them. Scott's radio crackled. Loud. Clear. A woman's voice came through. "Dalton, this is Abby. Need you back at the cage for an urgent inspection. Engine issue on the return barge. You need to disembark at the next stop and ride back with the pilot boat." I looked at Scott. He was staring at the radio clipped to his belt, hand hovering over it but not touching. The voice continued. "Acknowledge, Dalton. This is priority." It sounded like Abby. Same pitch, same cadence, same no-nonsense tone she used when she wanted something done fast. But the phrasing was wrong. Abby didn't say acknowledge. She said copy or got it or just Dalton with that edge that meant move. And she'd never called me by my first name over the radio. Ever. Scott looked at me. His face was pale. He mouthed one word. "Don't." The radio crackled again. "Dalton, respond." Scott looked at the radio clipped to his belt. The fake Abby kept demanding I respond, saying it was priority, saying the engine needed inspection. He shook his head once, hard. Then he reached down and twisted the volume knob all the way counterclockwise until it clicked off. The transmission cut mid-word. Scott's hand stayed on the radio for a second, then dropped. He looked at me and said, "It wants us to turn around." I nodded. That made sense. The wrong phrasing, the urgency, the timing right after the chains started loosening. Something in that container was trying to get us back to shore, back to Point Hudson maybe, somewhere it had better odds. Scott's shoulders dropped half an inch, not relaxed, just less locked. I figured that was it. Radio off, threat handled, keep going to Bangor. That's when I made the mistake. I pulled out my left earplug. Just one. I told myself I needed to hear the engine better, check if the barge was still slowing. That was the excuse I used. Really, I just wanted to confirm the singing had stopped or changed after Scott killed the radio. Stupid reasoning. The kind that gets you hurt. The singing slammed into me at full strength, not muffled anymore, not distant. Right there, clear and close, pushing through the vents 2 feet from where I stood. The melody wrapped around my ribs and squeezed. My throat opened and I almost hummed along before I caught it. Then the image hit. Lisa, sitting upright in her room at Swedish Medical, not slumped in the chair by the window, not staring at the wall with that blank, distant look. Fully alert. Eyes clear. She turned her head and smiled at me, the real smile from before the diagnosis, and said my name. Dalton. Just that. But she knew me. The overdue bills were gone. The $3,900 every 2 weeks, the $1,400 rent, the van repairs I'd been putting off since August. All handled. All paid. Nothing left to fix. Nothing left to carry. I could just sit with her. That was the image. Me in the chair, her across from me, talking about something small. The weather, maybe. Didn't matter. She was there. Actually there. My left foot moved. 1 step toward the container. Toward the vents. I didn't decide to do it. My body just went. The deck was wet under my boot. I registered that. The compressor hum stayed steady. The singing pulled harder, a physical tug in my chest like a rope tied around my sternum, yanking me forward. I caught myself mid-step, locked my knee. My hands were shaking. Scott hit me from the side, not a tackle. A hard grab, both hands on my shoulders, spinning me around and shoving me back against the railing. The metal bar caught me between the shoulder blades and I sucked in air. Scott's face was 2 inches from mine, pale, eyes wide. He didn't say anything, just reached up and jammed the earplug back into my left ear with his thumb. I felt the red fabric pouch in my jacket pocket tear. The spare set of plugs I'd been carrying since Monday spilled out onto the deck. 2 orange foam cylinders rolled toward the container and stopped near the skid's front wheel. Scott kept his hand on my shoulder, pressing, hard enough that it hurt a little. I pushed both earplugs deeper with my palms, twisting them to seal. The singing muffled again, faint pulse through the deck. My chest still felt tight, but the pull eased. Scott let go. He bent down and scooped up the spare plugs, shoved them in his own pocket without looking at them. I stayed against the railing. My legs felt shaky. Not weak exactly, just not trustworthy. The image of Lisa was already fading. I knew it wasn't real. I knew that. But part of me wanted to pull the plug again just to see if it came back. I didn't. I focused on breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth, 4 counts each. That helped. Scott stepped back but stayed close, watching me. I nodded to tell him I was good. Wasn't sure if that was true, but I nodded anyway. The singing kept going. I could feel it through the earplugs, through the deck, through the railing, pressing into my back. Steady. Patient. Then I heard something else. Underneath the singing, quieter, sharper. Taps. Steady taps. Metal on metal, maybe. Regular rhythm. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. I froze. I knew that pattern. My dad taught me Morse code when I was maybe 8 or 9. He'd been in the Navy for 6 years before I was born. Worked comms on a destroyer, and he had this thing about teaching me stuff he thought was practical. Knots, Morse, how to read a compass without GPS. Most of it I forgot, but SOS stuck. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. I counted the taps to make sure, listened through 2 full cycles. Same pattern, no variation. SOS, 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 coming from inside Unit K-17. I turned my head and stared at the container. The vents were dark, no movement. The chains had stopped loosening, but they hung slack now, binders still locked, links separated by an inch or 2 at each corner. The taps continued, precise, deliberate. My brain tried to process that. The singing was a lure. I knew that now. It pulled people toward the vents with images of whatever they wanted most. Clear and specific and wrong. But the tapping was different. SOS meant distress. It meant help. It meant someone, something, inside that container was signaling, which didn't make sense. If the thing in there wanted us close, why call for help? If it was trapped, why try to lure us? The two didn't line up. Unless there were two things in there, or unless whatever it was could do both, lure and signal, trap and ask for rescue, or unless I was hearing exactly what it wanted me to hear. Another trick, another pull. I didn't know. Scott was watching me. I pointed at my ear, then at the container, tapped my finger 3 times fast, 3 times slow, 3 times fast against my thigh. He saw it. His jaw tightened. He nodded once, but didn't say anything. The taps kept going. SOS, SOS, SOS. I stayed at the railing and didn't move closer. The barge engine kicked up again. The pitch changed, deeper and steadier, and I felt us accelerate. The wake spread wider. The water still looked wrong, flat and black and heavy, but we were moving faster now. Scott checked his watch. He didn't tell me the time, but his shoulders dropped another inch. I figured we were close. The fog rolled in maybe 10 minutes later. Thick gray-white fog that came in fast from the north, swallowing the shoreline lights first, then the railing, then the wheelhouse glow. Within 2 minutes, I couldn't see past the skid. The container disappeared into the gray. I could still hear the compressor, still hear the taps under the singing, but I couldn't see Unit K-17 anymore. The fog smelled like salt and diesel and something else. Something chemical, not quite bleach, sharper. Scott moved closer to me, not touching, just near enough that I could see his outline in the gray. The barge slowed again, gentle this time, controlled. The engine dropped to idle and I felt us drifting. A horn sounded. 2 short blasts, close, maybe 50 yards out. Scott's radio crackled. He'd turned it back on at some point. A man's voice came through, calm and clipped, saying, "Barge inbound, confirm cargo status." Scott keyed the radio and said, "Secure. Intake ready?" "Affirmative. Berth 3. Approach south." "Copy." The radio went quiet. The barge bumped something. Soft contact. A dock piling, maybe. The deckhand in the yellow slicker appeared out of the fog near the bow, moving fast with a mooring line in both hands. I heard the line hit the dock, heard it pull tight. The engine cut completely. We were stopped. Scott grabbed my elbow and pulled. Not rough, just firm. He said, "Move. Now." I grabbed my tool bag from the deck near the skid and followed him toward the gangway. The fog was so thick I couldn't see the dock until I was halfway down the ramp. Bangor. Had to be. I'd never been to the naval base, but I recognized the setup. High fences, bright overhead floods cutting through the fog, warehouse structures with roll-up doors. 2 people in Navy uniforms stood at the bottom of the gangway. A woman and a man. Both holding clipboards. Both watching us. Scott didn't stop to talk. He walked straight past them toward a low concrete building, maybe 30 yards from the dock, pulling me along by the elbow. The woman called after him, "Weber, we need the log." Scott said, "Intake first," without turning around. I looked back once. The barge was already unloading. A forklift rolled up the gangway into the fog. I couldn't see the container anymore, but I heard the chains rattling. The taps had stopped, or maybe I just couldn't hear them anymore through the distance and the fog and the earplugs still jammed in my ears. Scott pushed open a metal door and shoved me inside. Bright fluorescent lights, concrete floor, a long hallway with doors on both sides, warm air that smelled like floor cleaner and coffee. 3 more people in uniform stood near a desk at the far end. They turned when we entered. Scott let go of my elbow and said, "He stays here until debrief." One of them nodded. I stood there holding my tool bag, earplugs still in, heart still pounding, trying to figure out what the hell I'd just agreed to. The intake point was concrete and steel under portable floods that cut harsh shadows across the dock. Sierra Holmes stood at the base of the gangway holding a clipboard in both hands, wearing Navy utilities with lieutenant insignia clean and pressed. She was maybe 5'7", blonde hair in a tight bun, green eyes locked on me as I came down the ramp with my tool bag in one hand and Scott half a step ahead pulling me by the elbow. She held out the clipboard. Signature confirms delivery and ends your responsibility for the unit. A pen was clipped to the top. Blue ink. Standard Navy form underneath with lines for name, time, equipment ID. I looked at the pen. Looked at her. Rule 5 was still in my jacket pocket, laminated and clear. Disembark at Bangor immediately. Do not sign paperwork. I'm good, I said. She didn't move the clipboard. It's standard procedure. I'm good, I said again. Scott's hand tightened on my elbow and he pulled me past her without stopping. She didn't follow, didn't argue. Just lowered the clipboard and turned back toward the barge where the forklift was already rolling up the gangway into the fog. I glanced back once and saw Scott rubbing his left wrist with his right hand, fingers working in small circles like something was itching or burning under the cuff. His shoulders were tight again and his jaw was locked. "You okay?" I said. He didn't answer, just kept rubbing. I caught a flash of color at his wrist when the cuff rode up. Blue, waxy, same texture as the smear I'd seen earlier near his pocket, same color as cargo seal wax, fresh enough to still be tacky. "Scott," I said, "what's on your wrist?" He stopped walking, stopped rubbing, looked at me with eyes that were too wide and too still. "Doesn't matter," he said. "Looks like seal wax." "Doesn't matter," he said again. I opened my mouth to ask when every light on the dock cut out at once. The floods, the gangway strips, the forklift headlights, all of it gone in one hard snap, same as on the barge. I froze, boots locked to the concrete, tool bag in my left hand, earplugs still in both ears, muffling the compressor hum and the singing that was suddenly louder, spilling out of the fog from the direction of the barge. Rule 4. If deck lights fail, stand still until power restores. I stood still, counted. 1, 2, 3. Scott wasn't moving either. I could hear his breathing next to me, fast and shallow. Sierra Holmes didn't stop. I heard her boots on the concrete moving away from the gangway toward the barge. Steady, even, no hesitation. Like she'd been waiting for the dark. The singing got louder, not just through the earplugs, but through the concrete under my feet, vibrating up into my chest. The melody was the same as before, soft, even, almost a lullaby, but clearer now, closer. I turned my head just enough to see her silhouette against the faint glow of the fog. She was 20 feet away, then 30, walking straight toward Unit K-17. Scott's hand found my shoulder in the dark. His fingers were shaking again. "She can't," he whispered. "She can't open it." I heard metal scraping, latch hardware, the sound of her hands on the container door. "Shit," I said. I dropped the tool bag, broke stillness, ran. My boots hit the gangway ramp and I went up fast, using the railing to pull myself forward even though I couldn't see it clearly. The barge deck was slick under my feet and the fog was thick enough to taste. Salt and diesel and that sharp chemical smell like bleach, but worse. Sierra was at the container, both hands on the latch. The singing was so loud now that even with earplugs it felt like it was inside my skull, pulling me forward, pulling me toward the vents. I tackled her from the side, wrapped both arms around her waist and took her down hard onto the deck. She didn't yell, didn't make a sound, just fought to get back up, elbows and knees driving into my ribs. I pinned her arms, held her down, turned my head toward where I thought the skid was and shouted into the fog. "Crank the unit! Maximum! Now!" I didn't know if anyone was there, Didn't know if they'd listen, but I heard boots running. 2 sets, coming from the direction of the wheelhouse. "What?" A man's voice. Deep, confused. "Push the skid to max output," I shouted again. "Cold as it goes." "Who the hell are you?" "Do it." A woman's voice cut in, sharper. "He's the tech. Do what he says." The boots moved toward the skid. I heard the service panel open. Heard the control dial click as someone cranked it hard to the right. The compressor roared. Not the steady hum from before, but a full throttle scream that vibrated through the entire deck. The discharge line would be frosting over fast now, condenser working overtime, evaporator pulling heat out of the container interior and dumping it into the air. The fog started thinning. Not all at once, but in patches like someone was pulling curtains back. The singing stuttered, dropped in volume, kept going but weaker. Sierra went limp under me. Her arms stopped fighting and her head dropped to the side. I held on for another 10 seconds, 15, until I was sure she wasn't getting back up. Auxiliary power kicked in with a low hum and the dock lights flickered back on. Not all of them, just enough to see by. The flood stayed dark, but the railing strips came up and the forklift headlights snapped back to life. I looked down at Sierra. Her eyes were open but unfocused, staring past me at nothing. Breathing steady, pulse visible in her neck. Behind me, someone collapsed. I turned and saw Scott on his knees near the gangway, hands flat on the deck, head down. His radio was still clipped to his belt, but the light was off. The tapping had stopped. I realized I hadn't heard it since before the lights cut. No SOS, no rhythm, just silence under the compressor roar. 2 people in Navy medical uniforms came up the gangway at a jog. A woman, maybe 5'8", broad shoulders, dark hair and a bun, and a younger guy with sandy blonde hair and a trauma bag. They didn't ask questions, just went straight to Sierra and pulled her arms behind her back, securing them with soft restraints that looked medical but worked like cuffs. The woman looked at me. "You the contractor?" "Yeah." "Step back." I stepped back. Let them work. The guy checked Sierra's pupils with a pen light. Responsive but disoriented. "Secure her," the woman said. Her name tape read, "Fields." "Clark, get the stretcher." Clark jogged back down the gangway and returned 30 seconds later with a collapsible stretcher. They loaded Sierra onto it, strapped her down, and carried her toward a white vehicle parked 20 yards from the dock. Not an ambulance, no markings. Just a white panel van with tinted windows and a government plate. Fields turned back toward Scott. Him too. Scott didn't resist, didn't say anything. Just let Clark help him to his feet and guide him down the gangway toward the van. I stood there with my tool bag at my feet and earplugs still in, watching them load both of them into the back. The doors closed. The van pulled away into the fog without lights or sirens. A man in plainclothes walked up from the direction of the concrete building. Tall, maybe 6'1", salt and pepper hair cropped close, badge wallet clipped to his belt. He stopped 3 feet away and looked at me with flat brown eyes. "Dalton Ortega? Yeah. Louis Fry, base security, come with me." I pulled out my earplugs and pocketed them, picked up my tool bag, followed him across the dock toward the building Scott had shoved me into earlier. Inside, he led me to a small room with a table, 2 chairs, and a recording device on the wall. He didn't turn it on, just sat down and gestured for me to do the same. "What happened out there?" he said. I told him. Lights cut. Sierra moved toward the container. I stopped her. Crew boosted the skid. Power restored. He listened without interrupting, took notes on a pocket pad. When I finished, he put the pen down. "Scott Weber briefed you on safety protocols?" "Yeah. You followed them?" "Mostly." "This situation will be handled internally," he said. "You'll be released. Don't discuss what you saw tonight with anyone outside this facility." "What about my supervisor?" She'll be informed you completed the run. That's all she needs to know." I looked at him. He looked back, didn't blink. "Am I done?" I said. "You're done." I stood up. He didn't stop me. I walked out of the building, across the parking lot, and found a shuttle van idling near the gate with contractor transport stenciled on the side. The driver didn't ask questions, just drove me back to Point Hudson in silence. 2 days later, I was in Abby's office. She wasn't there. Out on the dock dealing with a fuel spill, radio clipped to her belt. High-vis jacket bright against the gray morning. I had maybe 10 minutes before she came back. I sat down at her computer, opened the browser, searched Coast Guard Investigative Service tip line, found it, clicked through, filled in the form with a fake name and a burner email I'd set up at the library, attached 2 files. The first was a photo of the laminated rules card Scott had given me, all 5 rules visible and clear. The second was an audio recording I'd made on my phone, not during the run. I'd left the phone in the van like the rules said, but after, sitting in the Safeway parking lot at 3 in the morning, tapping out the SOS pattern I'd heard from inside the container. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. Repeated 5 times. In the message box, I typed, "Navy barge run out of Port Townsend delivering refrigerated cargo to Bangor. Crew exposed to unknown hazard. Security officer and receiving officer incapacitated. Recommend investigation." Addressed it to Jordan Vasquez, CGIS, Seattle Field Office. I hit send, cleared the browser history, closed the window, walked out of the office and back to the tool cage like nothing had happened. The Navy run shut down 48 hours later. Abby called me on a Thursday afternoon, said the contract was suspended pending review, said my services wouldn't be needed until further notice, said she'd let me know if that changed. It didn't change. I lost $1,200 a week, 14 shifts a month, enough to cover Swedish medical and rent and gas with a little left over for food. I canceled a generator repair job in Everett, canceled a walk-in cooler inspection in Tacoma, sat in my studio apartment in Ballard with my phone on the table and my bank account open on the laptop, watching the numbers drop. Rent was due in 6 days. Swedish medical billed every 2 weeks. I had enough for one, but not both. I figured that was it. Figured I'd have to move Lisa to a cheaper facility or default on rent and sleep in the van full time. Then the deposit hit. Anonymous. No name, no memo line. Just $4,000 that cleared same day and sat in my account like it had always been there. I stared at it for 20 minutes. Called the bank. They confirmed it was real. Confirmed it wasn't fraud. Couldn't tell me who sent it. I paid Swedish medical, paid rent, bought groceries for the first time in 2 weeks. I kept working. Picked up a repair contract in Bremerton, another one in Olympia, stayed away from the docks, stayed away from Port Townsend, stayed away from the water at night. Unit K-17 stayed at Bangor. I didn't ask what happened to it. Didn't ask what happened to Scott or Sierra or the deckhand in the yellow slicker. I kept paying forward, kept my head down, kept my phone off when I slept, and I didn't go near the ferry routes after dark. Not once, not ever again.